side. But I believe the geospatial industry is today in a very, very positive movement due to private equity visibility. We can see budgets increasing, specifically in defense, but also in tourism. And I can also see that due to the visibility, so more market intelligence available, also consolidation happens again, like we saw a little bit before the pandemic.
Welcome to Horizons, a World Geospatial Industry podcast. My name is Matthew Pennells, I'm with Esri Inc. and also on one of the many WGIC committees. In this episode, I'm joined by Simon Musäus, founder and owner of SWM Advisory and the author of It Is Your Game, to talk about the funding landscape of the geospatial industry and how we see this changing over time. Simon, great to see you. How are you today?
Oh, very well. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. So Simon's joining us as the founder and owner of SWM Advisory, but is a long-standing member of the geospatial industry and community. Today we're going to be diving through a few topics around the changing landscape of the business, funding and sort of strategy side of the ecosystem. But Simon, I just thought we'd open by really just getting a capture of how do you see the sort of funding landscapes across the industry? You've had a great career in this space. What have you seen in the last few years that's changing?
Well, I would say thank you for this question, first of all, and I think it is an incredibly important topic to talk about funding in geospatial, because geospatial is not necessarily at the center of the funding in the financing industry. And I also know that traditional funding mechanisms are not always, I would say, even visible for geospatial companies. Together worked in WGIC before, there are various topics around funding that we can address. We talked about project funding, we talked about growth funding, we talk about even startup funding. And I think there have been a couple of different steps in the industry, and it depends also from which angle you see. Space had a different pace and different rhythm as, for instance, land survey, as aerial surveying, as GIS integrators, and so on. And the most visible is obviously space industry. And space industry had a boost in the beginning of the 2020, 2022. Then we had a little bit of a dip in 23. And now, due to defense spendings, large funding comes in, and you can also see that some Musäus taken private by Advent in 2023. It showed also that private equity became more and more interesting. Now, when we talk about generally funding, I would say it depends very much where the company is in its development stage. And I'm focusing very much on small and medium enterprises. And small and medium enterprises always, of course, in the beginning start with maybe some equity financing, debt financing on a relatively low level in the startup phases. And later they hit a ceiling, often at this magical numbers of 1 million, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million. And then they have to see where the cash comes from. So organic growth has, especially in geospatial businesses, its limitations, because geospatial projects are often higher risk than retail. So we have a lot of weather risk, we have a lot of political risk, we have a lot of even economical risk, and so on. So I would say there is a lot of hope in the moment in some areas, and I think at this moment the geospatial industry is at I wouldn't call it a sliding door moment, because you only see them in the hindsight. But I believe the geospatial industry is today in a very, very positive movement due to private equity visibility. We can see budgets increasing, specifically in defense, but also in tourism. And I can also see that due to the visibility, so more market intelligence available, also consolidation happens again, like we saw a little bit before the pandemic. And of course, project financing, I think there's more and more consciousness about the ability of doing PPPs.
Yeah, I agree. I think, just looking at the number of acquisitions we see within the last, say, 6-12 months within the industry, there's definite groupings of companies coming together to really strengthen their value chains and obviously strengthen their offerings. So, yeah, acquisitions with industry is a positive sign, like you say. If we take a minute to dive into a couple of examples, maybe if you spoke there about the emerging small and medium enterprises. Obviously, we're seeing a huge boom in sort of spatial AI, geo AI based sort of startups. And we've got a couple of examples or maybe a little bit of advice to a smaller organization and maybe then an example from a larger corporate without, you don't have to name, but where you're seeing them adapting to the changing landscape that you just described.
I will try to avoid names here, but I think people who are knowledgeable in the industry will recognize a couple of them. And I would say we have, obviously, due to the AI boom, we have seen a lot of new opportunities for companies. I was yesterday at the Geo Business in London, and which is luckily enough, I would say, for good opportunities also connected to the construction week. I've seen an overwhelming amount of startups working with AI. If you call it Geo AI or not, I would say there are a couple of companies who are today combining GIS with BIM for visualization, for project management, for lifecycle management, and so on. And I would say they go very much the path of diversification. It is a company which is generating AI-based project management tools for small enterprises to do distributed processing into BIM. And many small companies are not yet at BIM, but they're sitting globally, they pop up everywhere in the world. And this company manages bringing them all together into a hybrid BIM, non-BIM environment. I must say I was reasonably impressed by them. They started 3 years ago and have today already about 200,000 downloads a year of their software. And I said, this is quite amazing. And new business models, and one company, I probably can mention that name because I talked to them yesterday, GIS Cloud from Croatia. They are generating an open, rather agnostic platform, which is not competing with the incumbents, which is actually complementing incumbents with new business models, with the subscription models. I would say this is also one of the points where smaller companies can relatively easily jump into the business. Subscription models bring something which can be integrated in the workflows, less than 100 euros a month or something like that. So we can certainly also see in the medium-sized business the radar satellite companies. Capella Space is a name for people, but you see also Umbra Space, for instance, with new models which do not generate this secrecy around pricing or customized pricing, open platforms, fast delivery, and so on. This means a lot of customer orientation. So I would call it a vertical specialization. And when you talk about other businesses and partnership focus, look at, say, the recent acquisitions of the American company in Europe and the UK especially. We have not often seen in geospatial transcontinental or intercontinental acquisitions. And now we see many of them. Consolidation, and this is where the medium-sized companies find an incredible synergy with smaller companies, now an aerial survey business and land survey business on another continent. There we see not the diversification here. We see more the consolidation approach.
Yeah.
People, if you follow the Geo News, you can more or less follow what I have been just talking about.
Yeah. Like I say, I think a really healthy indicator for the industry that we're seeing that trend.
Yeah.
If we look at that sort of small and medium enterprise, I know you spent some time looking at this and sort of the various strategies out there and growth. I mean, what's your advice to some of the earlier companies to say that they're partnering up with the major players in the industry? They're obviously quite a busy landscape, but what do you see, your advice to them, or what do you see the trends of the ones that are making it, and maybe politely the ones that aren't? What are the pitfalls they're falling into?
Let's start maybe with the things they should do. And as you see also in my book, I'm a big proponent of a good strategy. I obviously also know people like this. Like John Lennon says, so life is what's happening if you plan otherwise. This is not necessarily a strategy. The strategy itself does not necessarily guarantee the growth, but the strategy process puts the mindset of the smaller companies into a stage that they are able and willing to adapt to whatever the market is giving them. And I would say the small companies have the advantage that they're still flexible in the very beginning. Think about the McLeary curve. The earlier in the process, the earlier you're in the dreaming, the more you can change your castles in the air. And this is what small companies should also do. And so, first of all, find out where is the market at this moment. It sounds a little bit like common sense, but many technical businesses, especially geo businesses, and they come a little bit to the do not do, are in love with their products. There are incredibly smart people who saw a problem, one problem maybe, and started putting all their energy into resolving this one problem. And then when this problem was resolved, I think, well, somebody else should actually see that this is relevant for the rest of the industry, but without themselves seeing it necessarily. And it breaks my heart when I see this type of smart people then failing because the market is not adapting in the same pace. There's this rather general saying that we in the geospatial environment are always looking for the questions we have all the answers for already. It is a little bit relaxed to say it. I can see this relatively often in small and medium-sized, maybe not in the medium-sized, but in the small-sized businesses. People are perfect in handling a tool, and they're looking for something to resolve it. So I recommend them do your market research first. There are plenty of beautiful tools, and then does not necessarily follow what the big companies are doing, other than finding the gaps to see what they're not doing. And this is a tricky part. See what's not done. And this requires a lot of market research and a lot of market intelligence. And there's the second part. Once you found something which hasn't been done and you figured out it is actually a niche and not something because nobody needs it, then generate a pitch which is understandable by VCs or by anybody you want to get your cash from. And this is not necessarily VC. Some smaller companies shy a little bit back from VCs for many reasons. But you need the same pitch to a bank. You need the same pitch sometimes in projects, in PPPs. You need to convince somebody that what you're doing is relevant and it's worth it. So there you have the nice VRIO process. This it starts with a value. Does something have a value? And then you go, is it imitable or not? And do you have the organization later? So valuable, relevant, imitable, and do you have the organization? Incredibly important process, because only something having a value is not good enough if too many people are doing it. And then later, if you can find this single niche in it, then you create your pitch and go out to the market, go out to investors at the same time. The investor
Absolutely.
might be private or might be an institutional investor, or it might be a PPP. So I can see that there's a lot of movement, and be open, be bold to go out and tell your story. So I've seen, unfortunately, on these trade fairs, small companies with one or two of the founders sitting in, surrounded by beautiful software, by incredible, and they when you talk to them, they bloom and tell you everything what they know. But it's also about just stepping out in the hallway and asking people relevant questions. Not only waiting, get out, ask people the questions and talk to them as if you were the customer. And then it works.
100%. And we've spoken before on the podcast about really this sort of adapting your message, whether it be a pitch or sales in regards to the audience. And we're very good at describing things around the phrases we're comfortable with. Even the 3 letters of GIS, everyone doesn't know what they mean. So is there, I think, agree with you, is there a gap in the education there about learning how to talk to your audience, whether that be from a funding perspective, a VC or a project manager, right through to raising an idea within your existing organization, business or public sector or otherwise. So do you think there's a gap of knowledge there in really understanding how to talk in the language of your audience rather than the language that you're used to?
Matthew, you just hit the bullseye. You are yourself very well aware of the sales process and marketing and the voice of the customer and also on. And in Geo, we have, as I said, we have incredibly smart people, and Geo is rocket science. We shouldn't forget that. And we necessarily attract highly innovative and intelligent technical minds. Now, I teach project management at a university in Germany to engineers, to Geo especially, also architects. And the ability of going out to a customer, and it can even be a team, which is in the beginning maybe a customer, a mixed, a hybrid team, which are not all engineers, but also generally to other people in the organization who are not engineers. This is the first step of organizational communication. And then you have to sell all the time. And what I tell my students is always the most relevant course that you never get at the university is a negotiation course. Because negotiation is all about finding the commonalities and finding value. There are people who say that you have to get out of negotiation always in a way that both feel equally having undersold, but these are concepts, and I don't think that is necessarily true. But I definitely believe that a negotiation is a pure exercise of communication. Take negotiation courses, take courses how to write a pitch, and do it with people who are successful in other industries or in your customer segment. If you want to talk with VCs, well, then find somebody who has been successfully selling to it, and possibly ask somebody from that VC or from this environment to use how to use the language.
Absolutely.
Often it is exactly that point that people get. The VCs have a relatively short attention span, and how to get over these first 30, it's maybe not an elevator pitch, but something in the 30 seconds to 5 minutes to keep people interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said just now, I think people taking the time to do their homework when it comes to market research, but also doing their homework when it comes to the pitch and adapting their pitch based on a group of different audiences, whether that be different VCs. You know, you need to do your homework to understand what's their interest and obviously how can you relate to those. And as you say, negotiation is probably a clearly under-taught skill, whether it comes to pitching, sales, or frankly really just championing what it is that we do as an industry. Where in the industry, where are you seeing more on the corporate side of the world with things like the way different tenders are written? Is that another example where you really need to understand the audience of those pitching? So for example, a World Bank tender, you need to respond to in one particular way, a PPP tender in a different way. Do you think there's the maturity in the industry to understand sort of how you might say the same thing different ways depending on who you're actually talking to from a project funding perspective?
Oh, very much. I do think so. So when we talk about the project funding perspectives, and often we, small and medium-sized enterprises, depend on tenders. The cash is not strong enough to build own business models outside tender business. And yes, okay, there is a need to understand what sells at a certain level. And as you said, World Bank tenders, IRD tenders, or many tenders in that IFI space, International Financing Institution space, are designed in the same way. And they have relatively well understandable evaluation mechanisms behind that. But nevertheless, it can be a daunting task as a small company to go for a World Bank tender, especially when you go alone and you have never done this before. There are various possibilities. Either you hire somebody in who writes the tender for you, or you get a consultant who teaches your sales team of doing it and works along with it, which I would not recommend that you try it yourself under pressure. I think there are many people who have been working with this before. The good thing about this is once you have won one World Bank tender, you're relatively well prepared to set up for the next ones. The structures change slowly. There are a couple of elements in it you need to be clear about. What is about the performance bond, what is about the bid bond, how much cash upfront is necessary, and also the qualification mechanisms if you work as a joint venture and so on. It is not easy, but it's absolutely solvable. And the World Bank tenders are not only for large companies. And if you believe that you do not have the cash requirements or financial performance requirements of the last 3-4 years, well, yeah, then go in a joint venture with a bigger company. And sometimes bigger companies are necessary, needing this type of expertise you have. I mean, maybe you have a niche expertise and this is just asked for in these tenders. And then once you are in, then also show your strengths. So because you're in it because somebody needs you, and not somebody wants to take necessarily advantage of you. So this is the tender part. For PPPs, I'd say this is a little bit of a more diverse playing field. And PPPs are also new for many public institutions. And in WGIC, we had launched a report about PPPs in Africa. There are quite a couple of interesting examples, but these examples are in different countries and often follow very different tracks. And I would suggest there to focus on a single region and really study what has been successful there and why has been successful. The PPP pitch is, from my experience and also from my research, has two legs. One is, what is the business really resolving as a problem, which is the standard pitch, I would say, which you would also have in the World Bank. But the other one is, how do you envisage the cooperation with public and at the same time keeping public in the driver's seat? This is what sometimes is not an easy exercise, because public understands very well that they are not able to deliver the service as it is designed, and this is why the private industry comes in. But the private industry is sometimes imposing itself, or gives the impression that it imposes itself as the specialist and would have to decide what happens. But this is not the case. Public is the regulator. Public is the responsible face. And to play these two is for SMEs sometimes not that easy, because they are not necessarily professional negotiators or professional in that space. There's a lot of sitting back, listening to it, and discussing with the public, especially what do they see as a risk towards their customers. What companies, and allow me one word to that, what companies who are highly successful commercially in the B2B sector sometimes disregard is a political decision-making process, which follows other rules than a commercial process. When we say value in the private industry, we say, okay, there's commercial value, or we go even a step further with 3 Ps, people, planet, profits. This is still a company view. When you go into the political decision-making process, there are different clienteles, there's a lot of different juggling, different potential alliances, and we need to understand that. And support our counterparts here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you spoke a few minutes ago about some of these small enterprises now are looking at things like subscription models. And something I see and welcome your thoughts on is whether when you're looking at the tender-based business models or obviously projects, to me there seems to be still a mismatch there between many of the solutions coming to market are subscription-based, which I would say is the sort of trend, but the tender and projects are looking for a beginning and an end. And I guess, do you see that mismatch? Is that something you think can be resolved over the next few years, or is that something that's going to require a bit of education on both sides to say, well, you can't fund subscription-based models in the same way you used to in previous formats?
I do think that subscription is the way forward, and I do also think that in the project tenders, this is taken more and more care of. I also do know, and I think we talked about this before, the project the legislation environment often does not allow for acquiring geodata or access to geodata without acquiring the 100% property of it. Now, I can also see, because subscription and projects have one thing in common, which is the time-boundedness. A subscription can easily be for the time of a project, and this can be for seats, for software licenses, for data, even for hardware, and both have a value of it. And we can also see that subscription has a value for the future of the use, because it is usually connected to updates. And I see, especially for geodata in the United Kingdom and also for Ireland, models where aerial data, and this is imagery and other models, or this even further value-added models, are becoming more and more part of the tender requirements. And this is good for the industry, because to just take a simple example for aerial survey, if you would have to refly in a specific project environment at a certain time every year the same area, then you would generate, and you would have to pay it yourself as a public sector. You would have to pay 100% of the cost, which includes the risk, the weather risk, and so on. And when you are as a company, you are connected to a single provider, to a single customer, which has also its risks and complexities. Now, when we talk about a subscription program, it means that the risk is distributed between various customers, and the company can also act in a way a bit more secure, because it also distributes the risk of payment. So you shouldn't forget that. Small and medium enterprises are not necessarily very, very cash heavy. And we have other examples in Denmark, for instance, where we saw the program, the Danish Digital Auto Photo, for instance, running since more than 20 years now as a very successful subscription model. And we see other subscription models which are on the road. Man, look at the Netherlands, so the Cyclomedia, for instance, and there are other areas, and maybe also the Netherlands where other companies are working. Look in the United States, look in Canada, the large content programs, aerial survey, all had a seed where maybe even a government under federal government accepted this in the public tender process and have never walked back. I've never seen an example where from a subscription model, which was once established, somebody walked back in the proprietary environment. But there is a way to go, and here we can come back to one of these points we talked before, how to deal with stakeholders. How do we convince a local government or local procurement authority, and so in their environment, that what we are doing today also deserves to be considered as a subscription? And it's a long process, and it requires to talk to people we as geospatial specialists are not necessarily used to talk to, because we have to go behind the scenes, we have to talk to even with lobbyists, even going into the political decision process. We have good examples. Look at the satellite imagery. And they're doing this forever. So there's many satellites, or most of the satellite providers don't give exclusivity to the data to anybody, except defense in certain areas, obviously. And the same is with software and hardware. So when I remember that when I had to buy my first AutoCAD license many, many years ago, it was almost unaffordable. And today we're subscribing to most of the software. Esri has it, and many other on the GIS sector. And the more cloud solutions we have, the more subscription-based it is anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said there, about these smaller enterprises are working with the major players and ultimately looking for those gaps, and therefore ultimately partnerships and solution partnerships are key to these things. So I think in one sense the funding landscape will need to keep up and adapt to allow for the fact that data sources might be subscription, software might be proprietary or subscription, or different bits of your software solutions may well be coming from different providers. So it's, I think, a space that will work itself out. Now, obviously, Simon, you've worked across the industry for many of the big logos, and now for yourself. I know you've been putting a lot of time in capturing your knowledge and resources into a book. So tell us a little bit more about the book and the audience, and how you hope that's going to help the industry grow.
Well, thank you for the question. And well, my book I called it "It Is Your Game," and the history of that is I've been lucky enough to attend the courses at the MIT and Harvard and Stanford, this famous 1 week or 2 week execution programs. And I myself, in a second degree, I hold a Doctor of Business Administration. I found it always interesting, on top of the engineering, to understand more how the business actually works. Now, at these courses, MIT, Stanford, and so you to come together with people from the real big names. And these are people who are also listening, as you do, to the examples like Amazon and Apple and why Nokia had its path and Apple had its path. Out of this course, incredibly energized and say, okay, now I want to do this. I want to generate value out of this in my own environment. And then lean a little bit back and think in my, be it division of 400, 500 people or a land surveying company of 30, 50 people, how does this relate to my reality? And this is where often people then stop. And so the transferability of all this knowledge, of this incredibly powerful tools and impactful tools, is get stuck in the actual application to the vast majority of the businesses and small and medium enterprises. And we should not forget that small and medium enterprises are often working hands-on up to the CEO. There is no fully dedicated middle management. There is no strategy VP or an M&A department or something like that. This is all in the hands of the owner and maybe 2 or 3 more people. And I thought, well, this might be a bit of a waste on very, very large amounts of businesses. And why don't I just take the tools, and I've identified 37 different tools as business tools which SME would be using for their strategy process first, and then later for the execution. And I've split this into 4 steps. The first is the market exploration. How do I use these tools to understand more of my environment? Then the second one is, how do I actually write a strategy? How do I sit together with my people and bring this to paper? The third step is the execution. And this goes down to very, very basic tools like a gap analysis or root case analysis, what happens when something really goes wrong, or risk analysis or sensitivity analysis. Oh, fantastic, very important. And in the 4th chapter, I talk about teams. How do I deal with teams? How do I do decision making in the teams? Also in small and medium enterprises, a little bit around the kitchen table decisions, but how to do this in a structured way, in a more efficient way. And one of my favorite topics, biases. How do I deal with the biases of people? Well, so you look into social media today, and the most important biases today is like confirmation bias. I have so much data around. And so why do people often tend to just believe the information which are already underscoring what they already believe and forget about the rest? So this happens in small businesses, and it has an incredible impact in why they cannot move sometimes into a next step. And what I do here is on my homepage, so the book can be bought on Amazon, but on my homepage, people can download directly application examples for geo businesses. I started with the aerial survey business, for the standard SME, was 2 airplanes, production in the 3rd country, and so on. And now I have use cases for land surveyors, which have consultancy and BIM transformation in it. And I'm working on these use cases together with industry specialists. And so the number of use case scenarios for each of the tools is growing. And I have also uploaded Excel sheets where everybody can download with guiding questions an Excel sheet and inject this in the own process. So the whole idea here is to open these impactful tools to SMEs, to give them the chance to benefit from what business schools have already done for many years and be mindful of their time. And there's one sentence which I love. I heard it many, many years ago, especially in an SME environment, fast-moving SME environment, is a good solution in time is better than the perfect that never comes.
Great statement.
This is where we're working on it.
Yeah. No, I agree, Simon. And I think we were saying earlier in the conversation that we are naturally in industry of very highly talented technical people who are very good at building solutions to problems, very advanced solutions, and I guess are experts in the technology. But if I summarize what we've possibly been saying there is they maybe need to spread that expertise across the business side of the house, especially things like market, and I mean market research as much as marketing, although as we spoke about really refining the pitch to different audiences, you could say marketing both pre and post solution development. And I guess the other one that I realized early on in my career was the business psychology, the people side of it, actually knowing how people work, what makes them tick. So again, understanding your audience and you can know all the facts about your data and technology, but if you don't understand your audience, what's driving their mission and vision, and what's driving those people as individuals, you can't adapt. So the whole areas of sort of EQ and IQ are, I think, key parts again that should be taught more and more, because they enable the technology and so to have more impact and grow from there. So thank you for bringing that story really nicely together, and obviously encourage our listeners and audiences to go check out the book. As we look to wrap up, Simon, I guess we've spoken about where things are, where they've been coming from. If we were to look into the crystal ball, what do you think the next few years has unfold for the industry, especially around the sort of funding landscape? You mentioned a more and more shift to models such as subscription. There's obviously a great growing interest from groups like VCs, which I think shows the health of the industry is really growing. And as you said, it's at a sort of key tipping point where the data, the solutions are very much needed now in various mission critical workflows across many different parts of industries and sectors. But what does your sort of outlook for the next few years look like around these topics?
Well, I believe that we are in a good spot today. So what I observed today, it is a little bit of difficult to say, because you usually know that you were in a boom when the boom has ended. But we can see that artificial intelligence and which is also giving today entrance to using more complex data models or more complex data. Like think about hyperspectral, think about radar, so which had its limitations with human operators. Now what AI and this computing power allows us to do. So I do believe that we will see in the future quite a couple of exponential growing interest. Now, unfortunately, in general, or maybe fortunately for our industry, the defense budgets are growing. And defense boosts the need for data, but also the need for technology, which very much brings us into the area of dual use. And dual use is something which we will see more and more growing. Think about the drone space, think about higher resolved satellites, or think about simply data engines which will combine all the existing data. We're swimming in data. A couple of years ago, we talked about data is the new oil, and now we're swimming in oil. So now what do we do with it? So is it good oil, is it bad oil, or it's a combination of these two oils, possibly even something better? So I believe that, defense, climate resilience with all the data will help us. So it will outpace a lot of the civilian budget, I would say, the savings. I can see more private equity being interested. The PEs have a lot of money, have a lot of cash, and are willing to bring it in the specific, especially in the space environment, because it's growing very fast. Then companies are seeing more annual recurring revenue deals. We talked about subscription, and we shouldn't forget that companies that have profitable data-rich platforms, the platforms themselves, so the software or the data, are much higher evaluated than just service or pre-revenue hardware constellations or so on. They are all working, say, at multipliers in the 8 to 12, while others who do not work on resale subscription and solutions, I would say, are usually in the multiplier range of 4. So I see a move to value addition. I see a move to as a service still, or subscription models, and I see also a move more and more to consolidation, and definitely which might come a little bit at the tail end, a boost of PPPs once we get hopefully a little bit beyond protectionism, because I think I see in the moment a little bit of a setback because governments are a little bit more cautious about what to share. But also here, it's just a matter of which type of instruments, type of security instruments are in place. So I think we're in a good spot at this moment. And for an SME, I can just say, just keep on looking for the niche. Use tools, don't waste your time, just trial and error, and don't stick to what you have been doing all the time. There are every day new opportunities coming up, and be open to the people, and also talk to the specialists, even if they don't talk to you, because they might not be able to do it because they don't have a pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, keep your eyes open and do your homework is the key takeaway. I will just go back on something you said there, which I've said before, but I welcome your opinion on, which is the understanding of the broader ecosystem and actually the investment required. You mentioned that the classic, data is the new oil, and a phrase or comparison I've drawn before is that a lot of effort and energy goes into getting the oil out the ground, the infrastructure that goes to processing it before we put it as petrol directly into our cars. Do you think the major decision makers and investors and governments and end users across the industry really understand that they might just want a pixel delivered to them every day to show change over time? Do they understand that there's a lot of work going into putting planes in the air, putting satellites into space, or processing of data across the whole value chain? Do you think there's still a bit of education for them to understand it's a bit more tricky behind the scenes? Again, we go to the petrol station, that's very convenient, but there's billions of dollars of infrastructure getting this stuff out the ground. So in that comparison, do you think the industry's got some education tasks on actually what needs to go on behind the scenes to deliver some of these things? And again, at scale, those things might be done through different models moving forward.
I do think that we have work to do. Now, you gave the petrol station example. You and I, we do not think about all the refineries. Just because the refineries are more complex, we would not be willing to pay more for the petrol, even though we understand that. Now, this is a typical B2C business. And we in Geospatial, even though we're working more and more with B2, generally in the WGIC environment or in our industry, but we are often still B2B or B2G. So we're working with informed customers. We have to acknowledge that these customers are knowledgeable in geospatial in general, but that not everybody is keeping up with the developments. I see it as one of the most important tasks of industry bodies and the industry to inform in a positive way our customer environment in the way they understand it. And so governments do understand. I know there are many conferences out there, also governmental oriented conferences. We have to make our own pitch for the industry. I'm representing the European Association of Aerial Survey Industries, for instance. We've been trying to inform people about how complex it is with airplanes and aerial survey. And let's say a shower can approach is not helping necessarily. But when we go, for instance, directly to the air traffic controllers, when we go directly to the agricultural ministries, and tell them in their language what is our synergy here and why do we need their support, and they might want to have our support in a different way, then we are successful. And I see it for the industry bodies as exactly this task, to give the general backup where then the industry members, the geospatial industry members, can then tap in and take this general piece, combine it with a specific piece in their specific areas. And I do believe that there's a lot of education to be done, but that's not over-educate. You don't need to know how an engine works to drive a car, but you at least need to know when something is going wrong or what could go wrong if you have the wrong one.
Yeah, appreciation without full understanding. Absolutely agree. Yeah. Thank you, Simon. It's been great chatting today. To our listeners, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and join us on LinkedIn to stay informed as we continue to advance global policy matters relevant to the geospatial sector and create business opportunities for the geospatial industry. See you next time for another episode of Horizons, a World Geospatial Industry podcast.